All right, let's talk about the revolutions in Austria now. As you hopefully can see from this map, one of the things that makes Austria really vulnerable to revolt or some sort of revolution, especially a liberal revolution in nature, is because it is not really at all united ethnically or racially. Okay, so this map is showing us how many different minorities actually comprise the Austrian Empire. We've got Hungarians, Slavs, Czechs, Italians, Serbs, Croats. We've got um, actually more non-Germans living in Austria than Germans themselves. In fact, Germans only comprise about 25% of the population. So, I mean, basically, what you're seeing is in order to try to control all these different minorities, which many of whom will at one point try to push towards their own independence, the Austrian government is going to be very reactionary against any kind of nationalist movement, liberal organization, and we're going to see that in particularly with Hungary, which is going to push towards revolution in 1848 but not be successful. Also, because you're further east here in terms of the economy, there's very much a reliance on serfdom still. So you're going to see that kind of the mass population is still kind of living without hope. They are very much inspired by some of the more liberal and socialist revolutions that are taking place in France. You know, the establishment of workshops, you know, trying to guarantee more employment, even though these revolutions are not successful in France either. People in Austria are kind of gathering information from them while they're still taking place, and they're very much inspired by them. So, as we said a couple of days ago, when France sneezes, the rest of Europe catches a cold. We're going to see that in Austria, some of the liberal revolutions that take place are very much inspired by what's going on in France. So Austria is still ruled by Habsburgs, and it's actually it's going to be ruled by Ferdinand I. He dies in 1875. He actually abdicates, though, shortly before 1848. So we're not going to see him actually in power when the revolutions break out. But he's actually quite a weak ruler. So what we're more interested in is that the government in general, not just the monarch, is very, very conservative in nature. Okay, so you really, with the exception of universities, where you know oftentimes you're going to see a lot of liberal revolutions kind of be inspired by the younger population, you don't really, within the government, you see virtually no kind of liberal establishment. Some of this again is because the government is, the population that is so heterogeneous, because there's so many minorities. The government is going to be very conservative and reactionary against any kind of nationalist movement. All right, so if you know if the Hungarians attempt to establish independence against the Austrian Empire, there's going to be a very conservative attempt to put that revolution down, which we will see in just a moment. Okay, I already talked about the reliance on serfdom a second ago. Also, the government in general was seen as corrupt and inefficient. You're also going to see that the government, especially economically, is going to find it increasingly in competition with Prussia, which is continuously gaining power, strength, and territory. Its military is very powerful, as we've discussed in previous classes. And so all of this is making Austria a very, very vulnerable place. And because of that, it will, you will see certain parts of the population are going to try to revolt against the government, and the government itself is going to have a very conservative response against it. Okay, so again, one of the most predominant groups that likes to protest against the government are the younger people. So this is just a painting of Austrian students trying to form a militia against the government. One of the first revolutions that we need to discuss is one that takes place in Vienna. Okay, so again, this is very much inspired by the February Revolution in France. Again, the idea that France sneezed and Austria caught a cold. Right, so because Austrian students in particular are learning about these socialist working class rebellions, the forming of barricades in the street. Very, very similar things are going to happen in Vienna. Okay, so you're going to see mass student demonstrations, rioting, break out in Vienna, and very quickly, at first, it's going to be very successful. The previous Austrian Empire is going to collapse. Prince Metternich, who was not the monarch, I know it's confusing because he was a prince. He actually was a diplomat. He was ruling under the emperor, right? So again, he's not the monarch, but still he flees the country, which is very significant because again, you see a complete collapse of the conservative Austrian government. But in order to try to figure out a way to establish a new government, you're going to see a constituent assembly meet, which shows some progress in the liberal direction. One of the most significant accomplishments that they make is they abolish serfdom, which in Austria we've also referred to as the robot. We've already talked about that. But what you're going to see is, partly because the revolution is not particularly organized, it is going to wane. The temporary successes that it makes eventually are going to kind of go backwards, in the sense that we're going to see a new emperor be appointed, Franz Joseph I, and as you can see by the length of his reign, 1848 to 1916, if he is the emperor of Austria up until World War I, we're going to see that the monarchy is going to be much more solidified than it was under Ferdinand I, and this is going to mean that some of the liberal movements in Austria were only temporary, but we will talk about some of the long-term achievements that they made. Now, this doesn't mean that Joseph had a completely easy reign. One of the first things that he has to deal with when he becomes emperor is a Hungarian Revolution. So this is led by Lajos Kossuth, who's a Hungarian revolutionary leader. And what happens is there were laws that were passed called the March Laws in 1848, and what they do is they actually provide for Hungarian independence. So obviously this makes Hungarians very excited, this incites a lot of nationalism, but the Austrians are not very happy with this at all. So what they do is they invade Hungary against the March Laws. And what the Hungarians, of course, do is they respond to this by raising their own army. And not only do they prevent the Austrian invasion, but then they also they continue to drive out of Hungary, and they get very close to Vienna itself. So as this PowerPoint slide says, the Hungarians actually drive within sight of Vienna. So the Hungarians push back very significantly. So what are the Hungarians demanding? They want autonomy from Austrian rule, they want to have suffrage, and they want to have civil liberties. And again, a lot of these demands were sort of driven by students in particular. You do see, because the Hungarian army was pushing towards Vienna, and because of the March Laws themselves, there were some temporary gains by the Hungarian revolutionary government. But again, just like what happened in Vienna, they are unable to kind of govern effectively. And also, while the Hungarian military is pushing against Austria, you're going to see an effective military form against the Hungarians, which ultimately squashed them. All right, so basically what the Hungarians find is that when they try to govern themselves, they really cannot sort of unify the minority groups that exist within the Hungarian nation. So just like the Austrian Empire as a whole, Hungary itself was not completely unified, and there are a series of minority groups that exist there. So the majority group in Hungary were the Magyars. But you also have the Slavs living in Hungary, and this minority actually is very upset with the Magyars trying to establish independence in Hungary, and eventually this is going to cause the Hungarian army to withdraw from its invasion. You're also going to see that the Hungarian army is going to be defeated by Austria and Russian armies, which are going to which shows a significant kind of conservative alliance to stop this liberal revolution. And so ultimately, what does this mean for Hungary? This means that Hungary, even though it had this temporary attempt at independence, it will not become officially independent until 1866. Another thing to keep in mind, again, the previous slide said that Russia was important in stopping the Hungarians. A lot of this is because Tsar Nicholas of Russia is actually he gets a request from Emperor Franz Joseph to try to stop the Hungarian Revolution, and Tsar Nicholas actually raises a huge army of 400,000 soldiers, and this is able to successfully put down the 140,000 Hungarian soldiers that are revolting against Austria. So again, because of not only Austria itself, but also the collaboration with the Prussian and Russian armies, the revolution in Hungary is going to stop. So